and I'm concerned about the arguments that are being made that we can't allow due process because our federal courts are overburdened. I mean, if that was the case, maybe what we would do is say, you know, in regard to criminal cases, we want to have the Attorney General's office set up some form of an administrative law judge so we can have the FBI investigate, the Attorney General prosecute to administrative law judges who are hired by the U.S. Attorney's Office. And then that, therefore, would be justice in the American criminal system. But I think most Americans would scream wildly that that's unfair. And to think that we're going to now make the argument that we can't go to federal courts because they're overburdened, the better outcome then would be stay at the SEC and be guaranteed an adjudication of guilt is a better outcome for defendants is absolutely insane. I agree with Mr. Garrett's bill. We should give defendants an outlet to go to federal courts and have their case is heard by an impartial group of judges and potentially juries. Mr. Quadman, do you agree with that analysis? Am I wrong on that? And I'm supposed to be spending my time on my own bill with Mr. Carney, but this is, anyway.
No, Mr. Duffy, I think you've hit the nail on the head. And the reason why I also mentioned about creating new rules of practice was if you have fair due process in administrative proceedings, you're not going to have a stampede to district courts either. You might have large cases move over, but it's not going to be a stampede. The other thing I just want to mention too, because this also shows how Kafkaesque this is, what got us involved in this to begin with was the general counsel came in and talked about a situation where they had an issue that both the IRS and the SEC were investigating. And the IRS gave this company a document giving all their rights and responsibilities during the investigation, and the SEC had nothing. So they are in complete no man's land from the start of the investigation through, and then when you go into the AP process, you have no right to discovery or anything. So it's a completely tilted playing field.
I did well as a former state prosecutor, won a lot of cases, but I got to tell you, I would have had a much improved record if I was able to try my cases in front of my own DA staff, no doubt. And I think that's why we see the rates of success so high at the SEC. I do want to transition to the bill that I worked on with Mr. Carney in regard to our small business advocating for better capital formation with regard to our small businesses. If we look at economic growth, we look at job creation, it's coming from our small emerging growth companies, and making sure that they have access to capital is incredibly important that we get that right. And I appreciate Mr. Carney's hard work and the bipartisan effort and the support that we've had on both sides of the aisle for this proposal. We all agree that we want to protect investors. That's a really good thing. But we also want to make sure we have the right balance, I would argue. And maybe to Mr. Matthew, do you think we've struck the right balance between investor protection and capital formation, specifically in regard to small businesses?
Well, I think currently we're not fairly balanced. I think that's what this legislation is actually trying to do.
I would agree.
And so I think we're trying to say that we support the SBIA supports this very strongly, because right now the small business investor and the small business operators don't have a fair say, a fair spot to express their position.
I would agree, and I think to have an advocate there who can talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly, specifically to the Commission, would benefit our small businesses and emerging growth companies. I just want to make one comment. I know that some on the right have made some complaints because we're concerned about the growth of government. We have a really big debt. None of us ran on at least this side of the aisle to grow government and make it bigger. And some have said, well, this bill is a growth of government. But I think that making sure that you have an advocate inside the SEC, promoting policies that will support our small businesses so they can access capital, they can grow, they can create jobs. They're the next innovators, Mr. Hahn, of the next life-saving products or the next iPad or Apple or whatever that technology may be. To think that we're going to use the growth of government argument against good policies that help American businesses, I think is short-sighted. Mr. Matthew, do you agree with that? Or Mr. Hahn, do you agree with that? I mean, does the growth of government for this small little agency that's funded by fees, not by appropriation, is that small in comparison to what this does for the American small business community?
Yeah, I think this is common sense. It's a no-brainer. The incremental cost, if any, far supports the benefits that will come. The lack of support of small business from day to day, it has to change.
Mr. Hahn, quickly.
The SEC doesn't often act on the recommendations of the advisory committee or the government business forum. The small business advocate would bring those industry stakeholders further into the SEC's decision-making process.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. So there's some people on the right that were making that argument. Appreciate that. Mr. Green is now recognized.